Good afternoon. Tony Dottino with you. Monday evening. Happy Easter holiday for all of you. And hopefully everybody is ready to watch tonight's final NCAA basketball game with Gonzaga and Baylor and conclude probably a successful basketball season. It's good to see that our sports teams are able to get through a majority of their activities and not have so much of a problem with COVID, though they had to be very vigilant and very disciplined in what they did in hotels and travel plans. And it got me to reading an article I talked about a few months back, COVID in the Brain, that is part of something that Sanjay Gupta is talking about, which is our CNN medical advisor, that talks about the latest findings about COVID and what it does to our brains and what you can do as a protection plan. And as I go back through that, it made me think of when we're teaching our memory workshops, what is it that we do that creates a recap of some of the key lessons that we want people to remember? And then what are the elements that we're working on now that really dictate the elements of brain health? And what are things that we need to be working on? So thank you, Sanjay. I thought it was an excellent article. It's a good piece that really ties into what we have in our 6 elements of brain health that we're working on now. And one starts with social connection, maintaining social activities and not becoming locked in because of the COVID-19 and figuring out how to become socially interactive. Our eating, our nutritional habits, one of the key elements in our brain health series is what do we understand about our foods and its impact to our food. Exercising, there's not a week goes by that I'm not reading another article as it relates to exercise, and it's a whole segment of our brain health training. We talk about fear, stress, anxieties, and how they distract us from the things that are important to us and how they divert our focus. And of course, the importance of, we keep reading, and every week there's another article out on sleep. And how do we deal with the insomnias and the challenges that we face during our sleep, all of which are part of our brain health series. So it brought me to a slide that we use when we're done with our workshops, which is, so how do we recap? Whenever we're doing a live workshop or a Zoom session or virtual webinar segment, what are some of the points that we really want to make sure people leave with as it relates to their memory? And the first one I always want people to know is the biology that we have up here allows us to have an infinite ability to remember things. We have these cells and connections and all this chemistry and neurology going on up in our heads, and that for an average human being, we have an infinite potential to retain memory, creativity. It impacts how we communicate with people. It impacts the diversity of social interactions and what you can learn from other people. And it's just a phenomenal fact that science has shown over the last 20 years through technology that we've got this unlimited ability to retain, encode, and use information. Now, in the information age, it's how do you absorb it? How do you effectively code it? And then how does it feed the creative process? So that takes me to recap point number 2. Memory is a skill, right? It's a skill that can be learned from people at any age. And so I want people to know with this infinite capacity we have, there's a skill that you can learn to enhance how you encode information into your head. And people find that really interesting because the myth that people live with, which is sad to me, is either I'm born with a good memory or those genes just passed me by. And that is not the case. And so we can improve our memories at any age, given first the belief. So do we believe that we can improve it? then given the second factor is there a method or a system or something you can teach me that then I could embrace and utilize? And then are you willing to practice? It's like we all know for aerobic health or anaerobic health, we have to either lift weights or we have to do some walking or running or some jogging or something that exercises our lungs as well as our body's muscles. But we know we should be doing that, but we have to do it. And so the same thing with memory. We know we can improve your memory in teaching you skills, but do you practice those skills? Do you utilize them on a day-to-day basis? And I don't think enough people first believe that they can, and second of all, have the confidence in themselves to practice and utilize the skills. So that's what our Maximum Memory Mastery online course is all about, which is here are the skills we've seen from over 20 years of conducting the USA Memory Championship. And here's things that you can practice in little segments. I was talking with somebody today on the course, and I was telling there's a lot of material in there. Take it in 10-minute pieces. You don't have to cram it all in and jam it into your head. Take it in pieces. You benchmark an exercise, see where you are before the skill, practice the skill, and see where you are after it. The third thing in our recap, which I find fascinating, that people have a hard time accepting, is because of the biology of learning and how we link and connect to that which is there. As you learn, you get into a learning cycle, learning more gets easier. And people, again, they kind of scratch their heads and they're like, wait a minute, if I learn something today and I want to learn more tomorrow and more on the day after, as I continue that cycle of learning, you're telling me it gets easier to continue to learn? And the answer is yes. And so our brains are constructed in a way that as we learn and we create these links and connections and associations, and then we have new information that comes at us, it just facilitates and accelerates the learning process. So that the more that we are able to encode and store for retention, the easier it becomes to learn more. And if you step back and think about that, it does make common sense. But again, sometimes we gotta kind of smack people a little bit and say, hey, pay attention. You've got infinite capacity. You can improve by learning the skills and applying them. And it gets easier as you go along. And we see this through the mental athletes that have competed in the memory competition. The next thing I talk about, and I always like on people to utilize in our recap, is you have to remember to remember. And that seems a little bit weird. You have to remember to remember. Yes, if you want to remember something you're reading, you want to remember a person's name or face, you want to remember where you put your keys, you want to remember a shopping list when you go off to a store, you want to remember the list of procedures you need to follow for a certain policy or practice. You have to remember before you start to read or you start to be in that moment, you have to focus in that moment. So you have to allow yourself the time to remember that which you want to remember. You say, wait a minute. Yes, when you come in the house and you're trying to think of where you're putting your keys and answering the phone or addressing somebody in the family who wants to immediately talk to you, you have to stop and focus on what you're doing. Say, just clear space. Let me focus on where I put the keys, where I put my purse, where I put my wallet. Let me focus on the things that I need to remember, and then I'll remember those when I need to go back and pull them back out. So it's like saying I have to remember to encode, so it then stays for retain, so then I can pull it out for reference, for recollection. If we're in the moment where we're reading something and we're not in a mode where we're trying to figure out how to store it, encode it, and we read through something quickly and we haven't thought of the process of encoding, then trying to remember it after the fact is near impossible. You'll almost immediately forget 90% of the things you tried to remember. So what we have to do is remember in the moments when we want to retain something, what am I using and what skills and systems am I applying that's helping me to remember what it is I want to encode, retain, and then recollect, and pull back out. The fifth thing we talk about in our recap are the elements of brain health. And we've worked on this. In fact, it's now becoming the next online course, the 6 elements of brain health, the 6 keys to brain health. And we're developing a new online course that's halfway done, that we hope we'll have done by the end of April. And off that goes, the people. If you really want to maintain brain health, there are 6 elements to that you need to focus on. And the science continues to confirm those, as we saw here with the article that Sanjay Gupta has written for us. And I'll cover those in my next broadcast on either Wednesday or Friday this week. The next thing in our recap, so right in learning sessions, you remember what comes at the beginning of a session, you remember what comes at the end of a session, and you remember anything outstanding that's in the middle of it. So what we recommend to people, because our brain, about every 45 to 60 minutes, our brain will check out on its own. Whether you like it or not, it will check out. Meaning it's going to drift off and think about something else that's going on in your life. So we now suggest to people in their learning sessions, in their educational segments, break your learning into 45, 60-minute segments and then pause for 5 minutes. Take a 5-minute break. Go do something that's fun, not stressful, not anxious. If you got something that's stressful and anxious, you got to go take care of it. Go take care of it and come back and put yourself back into that learning mode. So that we recommend that our learning sessions be no more than an hour at max, but ideally 45-minute segments would be superb, because you have a lot more points of primary, recency, beginning, end, and anything that was outstanding in the middle. And the last thing that we talk about in our recaps, so this wraps up our recaps, is if you want to put something into long-term memory, you need to have periodic reviews. There's a thing we teach, it's called memory rhythms. And in memory rhythms, it talks about, so what's the cycle, the beat, the tune, that our encoding will have, so we move it from short-term into long-term, so we have it for more permanence. And what are those cycles that we call memory rhythms that help us move information from short to long-term? Well, it requires periodic reviews. And what we want to do is teach people, how do you go about doing a periodic review? What's the first thing that you should do when you're in a periodic review? Well, what do you do after that? What do you do secondly? And what's the process by how you move your memory rhythms into long-term encoding, so you have it there for a longer period of time that you're able to retrieve when you want it? And so if we take these 7 factors, of which factor 6 impacts the brain health, I'll cover later this week. You take the 6 I've just given you. First of all, the potential we have for infinite memory capacity. It can be learned at any age, so there's no age where you can't. You got to remember to remember. Learning gets easier as you get more and more into a cycle. Memory rhythms are critical in terms of review periods. And last but not least, break your segments into 45-minute blocks, so that you have the beginnings and the ends and the outstandings in more contracted spots, which then helps you encode from short to long term. And what's amazing to me is the people that we've been working with over the past year, even during COVID, lots of Zooms and internets and phone calls and practice sessions, but the more you can get people engaged in these principles, the more that they're able to create learning experiences in their life that make a difference in what they're doing in their careers, in their educational achievements, and the results that they achieve in their self-esteem and self-confidence. And to me, that's what keeps me engaged. It keeps me passionate, it keeps me enthused, it keeps me reading and learning and studying, all the things that I can learn about our minds and our bodies that make us have the best life and the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. And that concludes my Monday 5 o'clock hour broadcast. I will be back on Wednesday in the 5 o'clock hour. Have a good week. I hope you've had a good Monday. And I hope it's going to be tough for all of us to say, I hope your team wins this evening, because there's only going to be one winner. But if any of you got to watch the Saturday night game with Gonzaga and UCLA, that's going to be a tough one to beat. So we shall see you on Wednesday, and we'll pick up our 6 elements of brain health at that point.